What's up guys, I'm Mr. Audio, and if you're new here, welcome. In this video we're going to talk about how I get my tracks ready for streaming purposes. First you're going to need to master your track. Now I've done a few videos on the mastering process and how you can do it. I even make effect racks for Ableton users that help them master their tracks. But that's still not the final result. Getting your tracks ready for streaming purposes is a little different. Let me give you a little context. See, I produce, mix, and master in 48 kHz. One reason I do this is it pushes the Nyquist frequency a bit further than 44.1, so that any anti-aliasing filters that plugins have function better at 48K, because it has a cutoff filter that starts sloping at a certain point. Now, at 48K, I believe that point, for most plugins, is past the audible range. Doing this will retain more of your high end when using those type of plugins. I also work in 32-bit depth because it gives me the most dynamic range. Now what this means for streaming purposes is I'm going to have to downsample from 48K to 44.1K. And I'm going to have to reduce my bit depth from 32 down to 24. Now the way I do this takes a few steps, and I really pay attention to the waveform because I've noticed lately that when making electronic tracks, I've had some intersample peaks come up pretty severely. And I've got a really good example that I'm going to show you. And I will show you how I eliminate these ISPs and get it ready for streaming purposes so that this doesn't happen when streaming services convert your audio with various different codecs and put them in various different formats for streaming purposes. Now I pay attention to the waveform very closely because these ISPs can come up pretty severely. And we're going to look at that in RX. And we're also going to use my digital audio workstation, which is Ableton, and you can use whatever DAW that you so choose. Now, why are intersample peaks bad? Well, they can, if they go above 0 dB FS true peak, cause unwanted audible distortion. Now, the steps I'm going to take here will completely eliminate those ISPs, and I'm going to show you how to do that, and it works in any digital audio workstation. You're going to need some version of RX that has these plugins that I'm going to show you. I have RX8. I'm pretty sure these plugins are in RX7, and you could possibly even do this in your DAW some way. So let's get to it. All right, so let's take a look at how I'm going to export my master once I've got it completely mastered. All right, so we're just going to look at my settings quick first. As you can see, I'm running it at 48K, all right? And also, we're in 32-bit depth. Let's go to my export settings. We can see that 32-bit depth, 48K, and I'm going to want to hit export. Now you're going to want to title it something that you can remember what format this is in. So I like to go 3248, and I like to put it in a folder that's going to make sense. Now once you've exported your track, you're going to want to open up RX8 to downsample it. This is the first step we're going to take in formatting our track. Now once it's done exporting, you can open up your folder. Right click on this track and open up an RX8 audio editor. Now what we're going to do, I know this track is already limited and we've got it sounding the way we like it, but we're not going to mess with the way it sounds. We're going to focus on just formatting it. So we're going to open up our gain plugin, and we're going to reduce the gain by a dB until I like the waveform. Let's go with 2 dB. Now watch the top of the waveform right here, how big these intersample peaks come up when we resample. So when you open this up, you can load up whatever sample rate you want in here. We're going to go to 44.1 because that's the format we need. And you can play with your filter steepness. Obviously, all of this is in the audible realm. So if you're aliasing at all, you're going to be able to hear it. So I like to make sure my slope starts at about 20K above the audible range and goes right down kind of like this. But this will cause some ISPs. It might cause some pre-ringing, and if your track is very transient oriented, you might have a kick that'll kind of swoop up into the kick. So play around with it, see what settings you like best, but I don't want any pre-ringing specifically on this track. Now I click the post limiter because this is after the limiter. Now I don't necessarily trust this to keep it below 0 dB true peak, so we're going to fix that. There's a few steps. All right, so let's render this out. Make sure the whole track is selected by just hitting Command A or Control A if you're on Windows. Now render this out. All right, now I want you to pay attention to the top of the waveform here. Notice how we didn't gain it down quite enough. 2 dB was just not enough. So ISPs can be a terrible, terrible issue that I was completely unaware of for quite a long time. I mean, I was aware that this could happen, but I was unaware of how drastically it could happen. This is an electronic song, and this is the worst one I've had. So let's undo this. Then we're going to open up the gain plugin again. We're going to render it down again, another dB. Now we're going to try rendering this out. Okay, now we can see that the ISPs do not exceed 0 dB FS true peak. Now we can save this file and bring it back into our blank session, save as, and we'll save this under a new name. We're going to click this, but we're going to hit 44.1. All right. Now it's going to save and export that. All right, so now that we've downsampled, we have to reduce the bit depth and apply dither. All right, now I just applied dither as a good rule of thumb, and there's a video I'll link down in the description that'll kind of go over how to hear what your dither sounds like. I personally like the noise shaping of Isotope's RX. So I'm going to use RX to dither, and I'm going to reduce my bit depth back in Ableton. So I'm just going to export this after I get rid of the ISPs, and then we're going to look at the waveform inside of RX and see if I did my job. All right, so let's bring this into Ableton now. And as you can see, tons of ISPs. This would totally cause some distortion if it was converted to MP3 or some other format. Now I'm going to grab Ozone 9 Maximizer. You can grab any limiter. I kind of know what settings I want already for this because I've done this a few times. But we're going to set the true peak on and the ceiling to negative 1.1 dBFS. Now, we're going to play with the threshold after I set the attack kind of fast. And add some transient and lower the sustain, and we'll see how that sounds. All right, because remember, I'm just using this limiter to catch the inner sample peaks. That's all. I'm not using that character. I'm not using it to squash into it. It's already heavily limited. It's very loud already. So let's just get rid of those inner sample peaks at this stage. Remember, it's all about formatting. So you want to go to the densest part of the waveform. Understand me now. Understand me now. And as you can see, we've taken care of those ISPs pretty nicely. Now let's see if it changes the way it sounds. Understand me now. Understand me now. Let's make it very fast. Understand me now. Understand me now. I personally like that setting the best. Alright, so now that we have taken care of the inner sample peaks, we have to export it. And as you can see right here, it's going to render it out at 48K and then downsample it after all the processing of the limiter has been done. I feel like this is the best way, in my opinion, to do this. Now we're going to apply dither in RX8, so I'm going to export it in 32-bit still. So we'll apply dither there, then we'll bring it back into Ableton to reduce the bit depth. So now we're going to export it and we're going to label it the same as the last track, but we're going to put limit after it because we've limited the ISPs. So export it and see it's rendering the audio out at 48K right now. And after this, we're going to bring it into RX8 to see if we've done our job. Now, when we're in RX8, we're going to apply some dither. After this, we'll reduce the bit depth back in Ableton again. I know it's kind of a back and forth game, but I want my audio to sound the best. And I've encountered a problem one time where when my audio was converted by streaming services, I could hear unwanted audible distortion, and it just could bother me. It's almost unlistenable for me. So I don't listen to that track anymore. Anyway, I'm telling you this so that you don't make the same mistake and showing you my process on how I get rid of those nasty ISPs. Alright, so once it's done exporting, open up the folder again. We're going to open this in RX8 again. And notice we've taken care of those nasty ISPs. So now we can apply some dither. I like to do ultra noise shaping because it sounds the best to me, and I only apply a low dither amount. And I like to auto blank during silence and limit noise peaks. So now we're going to make sure this whole track is selected and then render this out. It's going to apply some dither, which is just some low noise, to make the noise floor sound more pleasant. And now we're going to export this again. Hit save as. Now we're going to label this dither. Now we're going to look at this, get info. As you can see, still 44.1 and 32 bits per sample. We're going to load this back up in here, turn ozone off, load this back up into Ableton, and now we're going to reduce the bit depth. Now we're going to change our bit depth to 24. We've already applied dither, so keep this setting off. And now we're going to label this our final 24, 44.1. You can always label it final or whatever, but then I hit save. And now you've properly formatted your track for streaming purposes. And because your true peak is at negative 1.1 dBFS, any intersample peaks that are created through converting your music by the streaming services most likely will not cause unwanted audible distortion. And with that comes the conclusion of our video. And you know the drill. If you stuck around to the end and you're an Ableton user, there's some free racks with links in the description. There's also some paid products on my website. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Mr. Audio, out.